I'm talking about Plato's theory of souls, otherwise known as the Tripartite. The ideas of which are said to have been borrowed by Plato from none other than our friend here, Pythagoras of Samos. We all know Link is a time traveler after all. So how do you think Pythagoras got into this whole Triforce thing anyway? But seriously, some would also say there's also some credit due to Socrates as well for Plato's theory of souls. So yay, Socrates. Shout out to my man, Socrates. The Platonic theory of souls contends that there are three main types of people in spirit or at their essence. Again, notice how the number 3 is related to the metaphysical or spiritual aspects of existence. In the theory of souls, or what I will call from now on Plato's Triforce, Plato tells us that there are indeed 3 aspects of the soul. The reason for 3 distinct aspects, instead of the soul being one unified sort of thing, is because, according to Plato, it should be impossible for a person to simultaneously desire something, yet also at the very same moment be averse to it. This is otherwise known, of course, as Plato's principle of non-contradiction. And not to mention, there's most definitely a threefold aspect to humanity which has been recognized throughout the wisdom traditions around the world. And those are primarily comprised of thought, emotion, and volition. So this notion or this idea seems to predate Plato, although I think Plato understood it and brought it to the world with his own unique view. So what are these 3 aspects, and how exactly do they relate to the Triforce? What could the philosophy of Plato possibly have at all in common with a video game, of all things? Well, as it turns out, we have an incredibly close match between this dusty old philosopher and the hero of Hyrule. Heck, there might even be a buddy film on the horizon for these two. You never know. So Plato's Triforce has been mapped out in terms of virtue, soul, and class. So essentially, one's primary virtue or soul directly relates to which of the 3 classes an individual is part of. So according to Plato's Triforce, you're in one of these categories. You have a tendency to be strongest in one of these categories, although, of course, these 3 categories are all things that someone may want to cover in their lives, but may not always. It is the virtues or soul elements which determine one's class. So let's say if your virtue is wisdom, then you should be, according to Plato's Triforce, somewhere in the ruling class. And so every person's role in society is according to this model. Each being, of course, driven primarily, each person being either driven by their mind, their heart, or the gut or the stomach. One's role in society being a natural manifestation of the true nature of one's soul, of course. So there's this, you could say like in a manner of speaking, like a synchronicity or a synchronous union between your metaphysical nature and your role in the world of forms, right? The world out there in civilization. So that's kind of what this Plato's Triforce theory is trying to map out, is trying to explain. And of course, again, all 3 of these elements should come into play in one's life. But we have, for better or for worse, our primary. We have our primary tendency. Just like in the Triforce model, Link is associated with courage. As he moves through the story, he gains more wisdom, he gains more power. And for the purpose of clarity, we will refer to each part of Plato's Triforce as a soul virtue. So I'm going to kind of combine soul part and the virtue part, because they're rather, in a way, they relate pretty well, and they're kind of interchangeable. Although we should say that the aspect of the soul, there are, of course, in this model, there's three aspects of the soul. There's your rational, or the self. We could even say the self, the rational self, the spirited self, and the appetite, right? Or the desires is another way to put that. So those are that's the threefold aspect of humanity. So I'm going to show you exactly how Plato's Triforce works. And it's a little differently organized than the Triforce of Hyrule. However, both share the same set of virtues. Starting with temperance, or the appetite, this represents our most basic survival instincts, or taking care of ourselves and our base nature. So it all starts with temperance, the gut, the desires. It's just our very basic, very, very basic nature. So that's going to be on the bottom right on Plato's Triforce. Courage represents the heart, which is taking care of both our own needs and also the needs of others, as in our family, friends, and loved ones. So courage would be the second pillar, along with temperance. And of course, wisdom sits atop the pillars of temperance and courage. Most people will happily reside in the first two pillars, but some may also need to occupy the third pillar or seek wisdom in the domain of mind in their lives. In a certain sense, Plato's Triforce is a primordial model of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because if we look at it this way, if you start with temperance, this is the realm, or this is the domain of, this is just the self. This is the realm of the self, taking care of your own basic needs. Now, as people get older, they get married, they have kids, they adopt, whatever. They move into the next stage, or they move up into courage, which is the heart. And of course, courage and the heart is associated with taking care of others, right? So if temperance is taking care of yourself, courage is taking care of others. So many are perfectly fine with those two pillars, taking care of self, taking care of others. Not everyone is going into the wisdom stage. Of course, just about everyone watching this channel is in the wisdom stage, right? We want more out of life than just taking care of our own needs, taking care of other needs, which taking care of the needs of our family and friends. Those are things that we, as wisdom seekers, typically already do. You want to have the two pillars in your life before you get to the wisdom pillar, right? Whether you raise a family or you have whatever it is, nieces and nephews, you're in your community, you have a group of friends, and you're taking care of them, right? You've come into the courage stage, so you're not just taking care of yourself. And then, of course, some people seek more. Not all people do. A lot of people are happy in the second pillar, taking care of their family, their loved ones, and they'll have a beautiful life, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And then there's other people that come into the wisdom. They come into the realm of the mind, and they're seeking the third point, or the third equilateral triangle, if you will, right? They're seeking that third aspect of themselves. Okay. So that's basically what we're looking at. Is not only is this a hierarchy of needs, because we're talking about, your basic needs. What are your most basic needs? To feed yourself, to survive, right? That's the gut. That is the appetite. That's the most basic. That's taking care of your own basic needs. And that's, as a child, they are just concerned with taking care of their own needs. And then as you get older and you move into the courage stage, you fall in love, maybe you take care of someone else, you raise a family, that kind of thing. Or you have a group of family, and you have a group of friends, family, what have you. And you take care of those people in your life. You move into the courage stage. And of course, on the hierarchy of needs and in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a little more defined, but you can understand the point that if you move into the second stage, the second pillar of courage, then there's another need, and that need is connection, that need is love, that need is community, friendship, that kind of thing. So that's the second need. And of course, there's a third need in this Plato's Triforce, which is wisdom, right? I have that need, desperately have that need, right? Obviously. And a lot of you have that need desperately. We're all wisdom seekers on different levels, and that also is something that fulfills us. So if you are a wisdom seeker, and you have, you generally should have temperance and courage as pillars to your wisdom. It isn't always that way. However, the wisdom seeking, if someone goes from temperance right to the wisdom, it's kind of a corrupted version of wisdom in a way. But also, there are ways to come into your wisdom through courage and temperance, and not maybe, some people, your number one or your strongest domain is wisdom, right? And maybe at the exclusion of your own needs, at the exclusion of the temperance force, and maybe at the exclusion of others, right? So that's something worth thinking about, is if you're only in the wisdom part of it, make sure you're taking care of your own needs and you can take care of the needs of others in your life, right? So that was Plato's model. That's Plato's idea, basically, that he borrowed a little bit from Pythagoras and from Socrates. That's kind of a model of living a good life, essentially. And the Triforce is essentially, the Triforce from The Legend of Zelda is exactly this teaching. And I'm going to explain now how this Plato's Triforce will map, in my opinion, quite perfectly, just about. And I'll actually explain temperance, because we don't see power shown here. Remember, in The Legend of Zelda, we have wisdom, courage, and power on the Triforce, but we have temperance instead. But I'm going to show you exactly how that fits in. So the first element, of course, of Plato's Triforce is the soul virtue of courage. And it's the class associated with the guardians of a society, the soldiers of any given civilization. Okay. Using the tripartite soul model as it maps to the human body, which is a common method for presenting this model, the soul virtue of courage and the class of the guardian or soldier is associated with the heart, which is also referred to as Thymos, which, of course, is exactly what courage is. It's, as the Latin word cor, the root word for courage is derived, meaning heart. So it's exactly what it is. Courage, of course, is exactly the virtue embodiment of our Peter Pan-inspired hero here, Link. The second element of Plato's Triforce of Souls is the soul virtue of wisdom. The domain of the soul virtue of wisdom lies within, of course, the realm of the intellect, and it represents the ruling class of a civilization. It represents the decision makers. This is referred to, and I should back up for a second. Having this wisdom is also, it doesn't mean you have to be necessarily a decision maker in the ultimate sense, but a decision maker in your own lives and helping others make decisions, right? People come to you. If your domain is wisdom, you will know this for many reasons, but one of them is people come to you and ask you questions. What should I do about this? What should I do about that? That means your domain is wisdom. This is referred to, of course, as the logos, which in the tripartite soul model is associated with the head. And there can be no doubt that Princess Zelda most certainly represents Plato's Triforce, as well as the Triforce of wisdom. The third element of Plato's Triforce is the soul virtue of temperance. Now, first we have to acknowledge that what the difference here, of course, is that in the Ocarina of Time, there's a major shift as hardcore Legend of Zelda fans understand that the keeper of the Triforce of power is, up until the Ocarina of Time, is actually Impa here. And she's Princess Zelda's nursemaid, who is the first representation of the Triforce of power. So it isn't Ganon the whole way through in the series. It was only during the Ocarina of Time that Impa was deposed, and Ganon then became associated with the Triforce of power. The sole virtue of temperance has to do with the appetites and desires, which is known as eros, and is associated with the stomach in Plato's tripartite soul model. Now, here's where things get really interesting, because if Impa is the embodiment of the Triforce of power, what does the loss of the virtue of temperance look like? Right? It becomes power. It looks exactly like Ganon, the endless and unsatisfied appetite for power. So this actually fits in really well with Plato's Triforce. Ganon throws the land of Hyrule out of balance by taking this Triforce for himself. Now think about which class of Plato's three souls Ganon truly belongs to, or most likely would be part of. And it's not hard to tell that he dwells in the class of the soldier, which is associated with the soul virtue of courage. And if you remember earlier in the presentation, I talk about how Ganon has this appearance of courage because he's just like Link. They're both in the same domain, right? They both dwell in the heart. They dwell in the Triforce of courage. They both occupy the same space. Now, Plato's Triforce theory mentions something really interesting. And Plato says that each class is to appropriate their own corresponding roles. And if they assume another role, which they are outsiders of, right? If they come into another realm of the three that they're not really, that isn't their natural dwelling place, then that would most certainly destroy peaceful order and cause great upheaval in a civilization. Right? Does that sound familiar to the land of Hyrule? So that's exactly why the Plato's Triforce maps so wonderfully well to the Triforce of the Legend of Zelda. So I just love that comparison. And so to kind of summarize this, in the words of Alfred North Whitehead, of all people, the safest general characterization of the philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Now, this shouldn't be taken like completely verbatim or completely on its face, but maybe every video game influenced by the Legend of Zelda series may be in some indirect way be a footnote as well, right? And I believe that. I believe a lot of games are actually a footnote to the Legend of Zelda series in many different ways, since there are so many innovations from the Legend of Zelda games. One thing is for certain, the symbolism of the Triforce and the equilateral triangle in general have some very interesting connections to the esoteric mystery traditions indeed.